In this lesson, you're going to learn how to calculate the terminal value of Apple here by using the first of two methods, which is the terminal value multiples method. Now, just to review, in a DCF analysis, we value a company by summing up the present value of its free cash flows and then adding into that the present value of its terminal value. So at the end of this period, at the end of year 5, 2014 here, we either assume that the company is sold for a certain multiple of EBITDA or free cash flow, for example, or we assume that it continues to operate indefinitely, but that over time its value converges on a specific number. So we can use one of those two methods to determine the terminal value of the company and then discount it back to the present value. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the first one, which is called the terminal multiples method. And in this one, we're going to assume that Apple is sold for a specific amount based on its EBITDA right here or its free cash flow at the end of year 5. So the first thing we need to do here is figure out what kind of multiple we want to use for this. So for the terminal EBITDA multiple, we could use a couple different approaches. If we go back to the public comps page, we could take, for example, the median of this set right here, so 7, 5.5, for example. We could use Apple's existing EBITDA multiple. We could also look at the precedent transactions and take a look at the EBITDA multiples here. The only problem is that these are much higher than the public company comparables, so these are probably not the best ones to use. These are probably overly aggressive. So most of the time in investment banking, you go back to the public company comparables or to what the company is currently trading at, what its current EBITDA multiples are, and you use something in that range. So in this case, given that the comparables are around 7x EBITDA and Apple's own multiple is around 10x EBITDA, we're just going to go with the assumption of 7 here. Now we have this set for now, but you'll see later on that we actually look at a range around this most of the time. So we might look at a range from 4 to 10 in this case, for example. So this is really just a baseline. In investment banking, you always look at sensitivities and you look at a range around this value rather than just saying that it's going to be exactly 7 times EBITDA at the end of year 5. So now to actually calculate the terminal value, all we do is take our terminal multiple and then multiply by EBITDA in 2014 right here. So we have that. Now the next step here is we need to calculate the present value of this terminal value. Remember that money today is worth more than money tomorrow, and that applies whether you're talking about an unlevered free cash flow here, so any type of cash flow you're getting from the business, but it also applies when you go to sell the company. Because if you go to sell your company for 174 billion, that money is worth a lot more if you get it today versus if you get it 5 years from now. So you have to discount the terminal value as well. So to find the present value of the terminal value, we're going to take the terminal value right here, then we're going to divide by 1 plus the discount rate, and we're going to raise this to the number of years. So in this case, it's 5. Now again, for this calculation, we could also hypothetically use the NPV function in Excel to calculate this. So we could do that as well in this case. Now to sum both these up and get the enterprise value, so we see it comes out to 167 billion, 168 billion. One thing we like to do here is also look at terminal value as a percentage of enterprise value. So to do that, I'm going to take this PV of terminal value and divide by enterprise value. In this case, it comes out to around 64%. This is actually fairly normal. In 99% of cases, the terminal value is going to be over 50% of the value of the enterprise value in a DCF. I would say anything in this range is normal. If it goes above, say, 80 or 90%, then that is probably too high and you may want to rethink your assumptions. But something like 64% here is actually very typical for enterprise value and terminal value in a DCF analysis. Now, when we have a public company like Apple, we don't just stop at enterprise value right here. What we actually want to do is calculate the per share price implied by this enterprise value. I'm going to save that calculation and show you how to do that in an upcoming video. We're not going to focus on that right now, but be aware that we will have to complete that as well. So we're not quite entirely finished with this calculation yet. One other subtle point that I want to touch on here is that with the present value of the terminal value here, Notice how we're discounting it by the 5 here rather than the 4.5. So even though we're discounting the cash flows by the 4.5 right here, we're actually using 5 for the multiples method here for calculating terminal value. The reason we're doing that is because we're assuming that the company is sold at the end of the period, at the end of year 5 here. It would be problematic if we use zero point 0.5 for that assumption, because that would imply that we have not yet gotten the full value of this EBITDA. We would have to use an EBITDA value somewhere in between year 4 and year 5 if we were to discount by 4.5 instead. So that's why we are discounting by the 5 here. I bring this up because in the next method you're going to see why we might discount by the 4.5 instead, depending on what method we're using to value the company. So that's a quick overview of how we calculate the terminal value of Apple by using the multiples method, and how we use it to get to the enterprise value of the company, and then see how much the terminal value is contributing to the enterprise value of the company. Coming up in the next video, we're going to take a look at the second method you can use to calculate terminal value, which is called the Gordon growth method, which is based on long-term growth rates and a company operating forever, as opposed to the assumption we're making here that they get sold at the end of this 5-year period.